I have a story for you, and it's about a young lady whose name was, one of Mum and Dad can guess, Ellen. Yeah? Yes, her name was Ellen. And this story is before her surname got changed. Okay? So, and this comes from when Ellen had been called by God to go and tell people a certain message. And there were some people who said that what she was experiencing was from Satan. Does that sound nice? No, what you're talking about is from Satan. Satan's using you. That's not a very nice thing to say about somebody, is it? But that's what these people were saying. This particular pair of gentlemen whose names I'm thinking of actually had an idea, a belief, that you shouldn't work. Can you imagine what would happen if Mum and Dad didn't work? That would be a bit of a problem, right? And they said no one needs to work. And so there were others who said, look, we think that what Ellen is experiencing is really from God, and we think that you should see her. And these gentlemen, their names was Mr. Sargent and Mr. Robbins, okay? And they agreed with Mr. Nichols, that they would meet with Ellen on the following Sunday. And it's interesting, I was reading this morning, they called it Sabbath, but that was actually Sunday for them. And they said, yes, we'll go. And then they promptly went somewhere else. Now, Ellen was there at Mr. Nichols' home, and she came down Sunday morning and she said, we're not going to Boston today, we're going to go to Randolph. And Mr. Nichols went, what? But we agreed to meet Mr. Sargent and Mr. Robbins. We agreed to meet them in Boston today. And she said, I don't know why, but God has told me during the night that we need to go to a different town. And so they did. And when they got there to Mr. Thayer's house, guess who was there? Mr. Robbins and Mr. Sargent. So instead of being in Boston like they'd promised, they had gone to Randolph. They didn't believe that Ellen really was getting a message from God at all. They thought that that was one big fat fib. In fact, they called her a false prophet. They said that she was a liar. So when Ellen and the company arrived, that was a big surprise. That was a really big surprise. And so, when she came into the room, you could see Mr. Sargent and Mr. Robbins were going, oh, my goodness, what are we going to do now? We can't get away from her, she's here. And so they had a break, then they had lunch, and then they had a meeting in the afternoon. And as the meeting in the afternoon began, several people prayed, and Ellen prayed. And as she was praying, God began to talk to her and took her off in a vision. And she was seeing things. Now, Mr. Sargent and Mr. Robbins got very cranky at this because they said that she wouldn't have a vision in their presence. That just couldn't happen. But it did. And Mr. Thayer, who owned the house where the folks were meeting, he said, now I've heard that if you get a Bible and you put it on the chest of a person who claims to have a vision, if it's not real, the Bible, doing that will bring them out of the vision. And so he got this Bible, much bigger than this Bible that I've got here, by the way. This is a small Bible in comparison. And he put this big Bible that was about that long. You ever seen a Bible that long? That long. And about maybe that wide. So it was about that long and that wide and that thick. Wow. Even bigger than that one. Okay, even bigger than that one. And he put it on her chest, and She picked it up off her chest, stood up, opened it, held it up above her head, and said, "This is the testimony of God." And then she lifted up her other hand and she pointed to the passages and she quoted the passage from which her finger was touching. And this went on for a little while. Now, we don't know how long she held that Bible up there, but we do know that the vision lasted for about 4 hours. That's a long time, isn't it? Eh? A very long time. And by the end of it, Mr. Sargent and Mr. Robbins were being very quiet because they had kind of been exposed as not being really truthful people, which is sad. Now, let's see if we can get a picture up on the screen here, because I did send through a picture. See, Ellen in the big Bible. See that one up on the screen there? That's about the size of the Bible that Ellen held up in the vision. And if we go to the next one, to give you an idea, you can see that hand on the... That's my hand, right? See, that's my hand. I took this yesterday. That's my hand. That's how big that Bible is. And we guess that it weighs about 8 kilos. And she held that up. That's like, how do you do that if God's not with you, huh? I don't think it's possible. And so they're not the only things that are important, but girls and boys, I want you to remember that God was with Ellen, and we know her as Ellen White. So you remember that God, when God is with you, good things happen. You can go back to your seats.